Okay, this video is going to compare competition and monopoly. And so what we're going to have here is we're going to use one diagram where we can draw where we can use this diagram to compare what the equilibrium in this market would be if it were perfectly competitive versus what would the equilibrium in this market happen to be if this market were monopolized. Now, that's probably not, if you want to think about the assumptions of monopoly versus competition, that's probably like a hard thing to imagine, because in perfect competition, we say there are no barriers to entry, and then in monopoly, we say that there are barriers to entry. So, like, how do you go from having the one versus the other? Well, this is sort of like, to some extent, think of this as a thought experiment. We're just going to say, suppose it were possible. And we also need to have the kind of cost so that it would make sense to imagine that this industry could possibly be monopolized or competitive. And so what we've done here in this case, one thing that will work is if we say we have a constant average and marginal cost. So we have a horizontal average cost curve, and it would be which is also the marginal cost curve. This would be constant returns to scale, the kind of situation where if you double all your inputs, output would exactly double. That would be the type of technology we would have here that would allow us to have perfect competition. So we can have a whole bunch of small firms in here. So just imagine a whole bunch of small firms, and small firms would have no disadvantage. Small firms could be operating in here and having a whole bunch of them, and then this would be our in fact, we'll figure out what the industry outcome would be if this were perfectly competitive. So if this were perfectly competitive, we know that in perfect competition, well, there's a couple of ways we could think of it. We could say that price is equal to marginal cost. We would also say that price is equal to average cost, because we have the zero profit condition. The long run equilibrium in perfect competition was that price had to be equal to the minimum average cost, because that was what gave us the zero economic profit, and that had to be the long run equilibrium condition. So price equal to average cost for perfect competition. Well, here's our average cost curve. Here's the demand curve. We'll get the price off the demand curve. So where demand and average costs intersect, this right here will be the competitive outcome. So we will write QC here. That's the competitive quantity. QC is the competitive quantity. So if this industry were perfectly competitive, we would expect to see a quantity of QC units be produced by a large number of small firms, and they would be selling at a price that we'll call PC. Because here we just take this average cost directly over to the vertical axis, and that gives us PC. So the pricing quantity we would predict or expect to see prevail if this industry were perfectly competitive would be PC and QC. All right, now, wave a magic wand and somehow say, like, oh, the conditions of monopoly now exist. We now have one seller of this good, and there are barriers to entry. How that happened? Well, we could just wave a magic wand and say that that's happened now. So if you're a monopolist and you're facing this market demand curve, well, we'd have to draw the marginal revenue curve out, because monopolists are going to set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So there's the marginal revenue curve we're drawing in. Again, it would be linear with twice the slope of the demand curve. So we have that drawn in now. And monopolist is going to face this entire market demand curve. They face this marginal revenue curve that we drew for this market demand curve, and we know the monopolist is going to maximize profit. So set marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. Marginal cost, again, is horizontal. It's our one cost curve we've drawn in here, is both average cost and marginal cost. Here's our marginal revenue. Marginal cost equal to average cost will occur right here. And we'll call that QM. That would be the equilibrium quantity if this industry were monopolized. To get the price for under monopoly, we'd have to, again, we know the monopolist wants to produce this quantity. They're not going to sell it at a price of PC. We'd read up to the demand curve, take this quantity up, project it up until you hit the market demand curve, and then go over. and that'll be the monopoly quantity, PM. So we have the monopoly outcome and the competitive outcome here, both drawn out on this diagram. So what are the differences? Well, one is that the quantity under competition will be greater than the quantity under monopoly. You can just sort of see it here. We've got drawn QC is to the right of QM, so more is produced under perfect competition. This is sometimes referred to as contrived scarcity. A monopolist would, if all of a sudden you wave that magic wand and you've taken over all the competitive firms in this industry and you were operating here, what you'd be doing is you decide, like, okay, you're going to reduce the amount you're going to produce. You're going to reduce the quantity. And that's a type of scarcity. You'd induce scarcity in this market by reducing the amount that you supply, and that would allow the price to rise to allow you to make a profit. So, but it's not real. It's not the scarcity that nature imposes on the world. It's this kind of contrived scarcity. So we put it down here, and so we would have that there's less being produced under monopoly, and that's what we call the monopoly contrived scarcity. Another difference would be we have a lower price under competition. PC is less than PM. So that's a second factor that we'd have here. So if you observed a firm that we think is a monopolist, I mean, they think it has market power, over time what we would sort of expect to see is that we should expect to see the price rise and the quantity sold being reduced. So that would be a sort of like a comparison we would expect to see between competition and monopoly. Now, what are some other effects? Well, we didn't draw this on the diagram yet, but we know from the monopoly equilibrium that the monopolist would be making a profit. And the profit for the monopolist would be the quantity that they produce, and then you have to take the difference between their price and their cost per unit. Their cost per unit is going to be happens to be PC. Their price per unit that they're able to sell is PM. So they'd be making a profit here. So I'll just shade this in here. And so a third difference would be in monopoly, under monopoly, profit is possible. So the third difference is monopoly profit is possible. Now, I said, and I have a diagram in my notes showing that there's nothing about the nature of our model of monopoly that assumes that monopolists must be competitive, must make an economic profit. In this case, it happens. With this diagram, they will. So there's this isn't a diagram on which you could say, like, if somehow a monopolist had this had a firm had a monopoly in this market, that they would not make a profit. In this case, they would. So monopolists can make a profit, but we know that profit is zero under perfect competition. So profit is equal to zero under perfect competition. And then there's a fourth difference here. There's going to be a deadweight loss with monopoly. There's a deadweight loss here, and we can see it on the diagram. The loss on the diagram, or the deadweight loss, is going to be on these units here that don't get produced. The height of the demand curve shows us the value of each unit if it's produced and consumers get to consume it to consumers. It's what they would be willing to pay for the good. The height of the marginal cost curve is telling us the value of the resources it would take to produce that unit. These units here, between QM and QC, the units that the monopolist doesn't produce, the range of contrived scarcity, If these units were being produced and consumed by consumers, consumers would be getting value. They would be satisfying their willingness to pay, and they would be getting value that would be reflected by the height of the demand curve. They would only have to be paying under competition, or the value of the resources that we're using here. Competition maximizes the gains from trade. Monopoly, because of contrived scarcity, does not maximize the gains from trade. There would be an area of deadweight loss. It would be because we have a linear demand curve and a horizontal marginal cost curve here, it turns out to be a triangle. And this area here would be a deadweight loss. And I'll just abbreviate that DWL. That's a deadweight loss triangle. And under competition, we have no deadweight loss. Competition is efficient. Competition is efficient. It's maximizing the potential. We're capturing all of the potential gains in our economy or in this market. With monopoly, we would have a deadweight loss. So there would be the differences between competition and monopoly.